this is the discussion kind of that I'll be leading, the talk I'll be leading. Sorry, a little nervous. I wanted to preface, I thought this was funny last night, that I tend to have long titles for things because one of my classes in my undergrad, my professor was obsessed with the idea that your title had to have the semicolon and then a full title afterwards. And I guess it just kind of stuck with me, and now all my titles are very comprehensive and long because of her. Okay, so a little bit about how this is going to be organized. So I've kind of split it up into a couple different categories that I'm going to be talking about today. Sorry, I'm trying to think of the best way to like arrange seeing people's faces. Okay, so the first area I'm going to discuss is the intersection with the trans and non-binary community, which I find myself in, and reproductive justice and what enables within that. The topic of surrogacy, which I'm very interested in, and how that intersects with the community, and also just reproductive justice in general, and the need for increased diversity. And then I would, if anyone have any questions, I'm going to try to leave time at the end for that as well. Okay.
And Sarah, just remember, keep in mind that we'll be taking care of the chat for you. So don't feel like you need to do that. If something comes up, we will either answer it or we will chime in, okay?
Yep, okay, thank you. Yes, so a little bit about me. Like said earlier, my name is Sarah Timmerman. I am non-binary, so I would appreciate gender neutral language, and an activist, as well as I dabble in political organizing. And currently I am in school getting my master's in public administration at American University. So I am joining you guys from DC at the moment. Yes. And I, in my free time, am the chapter president of Roc.SRJ now. That's what this photo is from, is me speaking at a rally. I was trying to think when, I believe it's the end of 2019. And I was placing it based on my mask. I wore that the fall of the election. I had one that said, but her emails, felt fitting after 4 years. Okay, so with the trans community and the gender non-binary and gender non-conforming community, there are definitely, and I wanted to give a little disclaimer before this, I am, as I explore my own gender identity and my own sexuality and whatnot, I'm speaking from my own perspective and my own lived experiences and my own knowledge. Obviously, I have not lived every experience, and I'm not going to know everything, but this is my perspective, and I'm open to other people's comments and whatnot, and as long as it's in a respectful way, as discussed in the beginning. So a big thing is the need for gender neutral language, as discussed earlier, but really it goes beyond that. So it's when someone is in your, like a doctor's office or a clinic, it's really the whole way through. So if they are wanting to be pregnant or find themselves pregnant, it's avoiding certain terms like automatically saying, oh, the mother, and those types of gender terms about parenting. And this may take additional education and additional awareness, but it can be very it can make the situation a lot harder than it needs to be, and a lot more like dysphoric than it needs to be, if that's not followed. Also, like even in birth, it's very easy to default to language that we've been using for so long, but it's important to recognize where someone's coming from and what's most important to them. I've really been on a big journey in the last year or so in terms of my identity and my pronouns. And you kind of question, like, is this really what I want? Am I really feeling this way? You know, are these really what I'm set with? And sometimes you play around with pronouns, and then you really feel it once you start. It's kind of nice in like a Zoom setting, being able to just like set the pronouns right away, because hearing other people refer to me that way has just validated that that is the way that I feel and the way that I identify. So it's also just about having that discussion with the person about their comfort level and how they're feeling, what they want. They may want to use these gender terms in this specific situation. Obviously, everyone is different, but you should be having that discussion with the person specifically. And they may have additional needs. So if they are going to be transitioning or going on hormones, that may mean a discussion with them about down the line fertility care, about freezing their eggs or freezing their sperm. And a lot of people kind of are transitioning younger and younger, and you're not necessarily thinking about these things. And also as a provider, to see like a 16-year-old and 18-year-old, that's not really a thought you might have about what they're doing, but people need to be made aware of what's going to happen down the line and what their options are going to be down the line, what their needs are going to be down the line, the expenses of all of this, what goes into it, and really be made aware, because maybe they do want to halt transition for a little while to have a child. And in doing so, it could be mentally very difficult for them to see the physical changes that they could be experiencing from halting hormones or not starting hormones. So their mind is in one place and their body is in another place. And people are talking to them a certain way because of the pregnancy. And so you have to have that conversation. Maybe they're going to need additional mental health. And so are you connected with anyone that provides that type of care, you know? And maybe that's not what they want. And so they're going to go down a different path in terms of adoption or fostering or whatnot. But having that discussion with them and having discussions about still being able to get pregnant and like what goes into that, how long they, if they don't ever want to be pregnant, how long they still need to be on birth control. Is that going to be forever? I don't know all the details to this because I'm not on hormones, and I currently do not want to be pregnant. But what goes into that? It's much more than just transitioning or just typical OB care. And also just emphasizing that in terms of abortion, it's not just women getting abortion. There are trans men getting abortion, there are non-binary people getting abortions, and expanding your language around it to be, you know, pregnant people need abortions, and people that don't want to be pregnant need abortions, and people who desperately want the pregnancy sometimes need abortions. But it's not just women needing abortions. It's a lot of different varieties with that. Okay. And then a topic that I've been looking into a lot, because where I come out of it with this discussion is a background in kind of abortion and reproductive health care in terms of the academic research that I've done, as well as just the activism research that I've done. And an area that's kind of popped up more and more is the idea of surrogacy. And it kind of has been intertwined with the LGBT community as a way for people to start a family if they don't have both parts necessary to get the pregnancy going. But this, I think, is a tricky discussion and one that needs to be expanded more. The map on my screen shows different surrogacy laws just around the world, and it really varies where you are. And if you notice the United States, you can see that it's a state-by-state discussion, and it's really different depending on where you live. So places like California have full legality on surrogacy, but then in New York State, we do not have full legality on surrogacy. And some other states, like Michigan, have no legality around surrogacy. And what I've seen is it is a lot of gay men using surrogacy to start families and straight couples using surrogacy to start families. And within surrogacy, a big term thrown around is the idea of altruism, which is that you're doing it out of the good of your heart and not from a economic standpoint. So that is used as a way to legalize surrogacy in many countries and in different states here in the US. And it's an idea that I really struggle with, because I'm not saying that no one's doing it out of altruism, but a lot of people, and there's the fear around surrogacy that it becomes sort of exploitation and the commodification of being pregnant, being able to have babies, and the babies themselves. And because you are paid to have the baby for someone, or egg donation is another area where people are paid for this. And in certain countries where it is more legal than others, it becomes a lot of the people that are doing this are poor and see it just as a way of making money, even if it's labeled as altruism. And it can be kind of easily exploited in that matter, in a way that private infant adoption is often exploitative and very commodified. And so I think it's worth a further look and a further discussion. And that I'm talking too fast and I'm not like saying everything I want to say. And I also want to apologize if you can hear my cat whining at me in the background. She doesn't like that I'm not giving her my full attention right now. But
it's okay. You've got a couple of cat owners here too.
Yes. She appears to have moved on, but she'll be back. And yeah, so it's coming up more and more in New York State here. There's been a lot of recent bills around surrogacy, because a lot of people go to California for this because it kind of has like the most legality there. Even when I was trying to look more into the laws state by state, every single website that popped up was just like surrogacy.com, prosurrogacy.com, surrogacyfacts.com. And it was hard to really find a lot about like the changing of laws, and most articles were from several years ago and about different countries. And it's really hard to find like up-to-date information on it because it's kind of constantly changing as it's becoming more and more into like the legality sphere. The problems with it in the beginning, especially when there wasn't these laws around it, is the idea of having the parents, I don't know the best way of phrasing this, but who pay for the surrogacy to have their names on the birth certificate is the big issue, because that gets into legality around the baby and like who's the baby's parents, and who has like legal control over the baby. And there was a very famous case in, I believe, the 90s about this, where the surrogate mother did not want to relinquish legal control of the baby to the parents, and it became like a huge battle. And so part of the advantage of states like California is it's guaranteed that the two parents' names will be on the birth certificate and not the person carrying the child, which one of the parts with adoption law in the US is the period of time that you have to back out of the adoption after birth. And so there's a question of like, is that built into these laws? And is there the ability to say, you know what, actually, I don't necessarily want to give up even, but as technology advances, you may actually have no genetic relation to the baby that you're carrying. It could be completely the other family. I just question, in terms of reproductive justice lens, the commodification of birth and the commodification of someone's uterus in terms of surrogacy, because like I said, in a lot of countries within, say like former Soviet countries, or also Greece has a very liberal surrogacy program, though, as a lot of people have found, there's promises of money that aren't delivered. It's a lot of young women, it's a lot of poor women, people, I'm sorry, and there's questions around that, and the idea of like who is actually meeting it from like an altruistic angle.
So Sarah, there are some questions regarding that. Did you want to go through them now, or would you like to wait until later on?
No, let's go through them now.
So we have one that says, those countries and other areas that allow surrogacy for altruism only, is the person who carries the baby to term not allowed payment or commission?
So yeah, so here's where it gets tricky. So even though it's for altruistic reasons, there is still payment involved. You just can't be paying for the actual baby, because that gets into like the selling of people, which is obviously dangerous territory. So where they get around this idea of not being able to pay for the surrogacy because it's being done for altruistic reasons is they pay for all the care, and usually it comes in like a lump sum. So maybe they get like 60 grand for doing this, and it's labeled as the person has to buy new clothes, they have to get a lot of medical care, they're going to have to take time off of work afterwards, all the things that go into giving birth and being pregnant. And so it's kind of labeled as also kind of altruistic from the parent's side, where they are going to be helping this person through everything, when really it's almost always a foreign couple that has acquired these services through an agency. I watched earlier this year this documentary of a lot of German families that will use Greek women as well, Greek people, as well as the former Soviet bloc has also more liberal laws around this, and will seek it out there, because in Germany, they're not allowed egg donation or surrogacy in any form. So they will seek it out just from other European countries. And it just kind of draws the line. You kind of have to question, should you be able to just seek out whatever country has the best laws for you? Where like in the beginning of the internet, from the 60 Minutes report I was watching, in the beginning of the internet, in terms of like, not necessarily surrogacy, but a lot of like infant adoptions, we didn't have a lot of laws around it when it was starting. So other countries would seek out our agencies because it was easier to just kind of purchase the child because we didn't have as strict laws around it. And that's kind of what's become of surrogacy.
So we've got one more. Do the state laws apply to where you legally reside or to where you give birth?
Yeah, so it's where the birth is happening. So a lot of people, like in the way that like a German person would go to Greece, someone from, say, New York will go to California, and or the person will be giving birth in California, will be receiving all their medical care in California, but the baby will not stay in California. It will go to, say, New York. So this is how people like Andy Cohen and Anderson Cooper, I'm pretty sure this is how they both did it. I know Andy Cohen did it this way, where you contact people in California that are willing to be surrogates through different agencies. And so you're able to skirt New York law if you're rich enough to just go to another area, which obviously is a huge thing with reproductive health care, is if you're rich enough, you can just skirt whatever law your state has and go to the state that has the law that works best for you. And obviously it would be better, in my opinion, if we had some sort of centralized system around this and there was more clarity around the laws. But no, it's wherever the person's giving birth, but you don't have to be from there. So people could come from another country to California in theory and have the child and then go back to their country with it. That's usually not the way it goes. It's usually the other way around, but that could happen, yes.
Okay, and we have, which color is the maroon? I see on our side, we sort of see like a coral color. And
yes, the non-blue, but not gray.
Gotcha.
I kind of labeled it maroon. I guess it's not really the color, but this color.
Okay, thank you so much. And what's the purple, someone asked?
Okay, so this is Brazil, and they are the only country with this, but they have allowed it, and I'm gonna butcher this law, but with family members can be your surrogate, and that's when it's legal, but only in that instance. I think there might be some caveats to the law, but it's a large country, so it looks like it's like most of South America, but it's just Brazil. And yeah, they have something with family surrogacy, which is its own kind of conversation to have, but I think that's more of a personal discussion if you'd be comfortable with a family member carrying your child, because that to me feels like actual altruism. Yeah. When someone, say your sister, I've even seen mom if they're young enough, or like some cousin, they're willing to carry the child for you. That to me is a personal altruism. You know, they're a family member, you're sharing so much, they're going to be around the child a lot. So it really is out of the kindness of them to be doing this for you versus a random person you're going to meet through an agency, who you're going to pay for these services and see them maybe through the pregnancy, maybe not, depending on what's going on, especially right now with COVID. People who started a surrogacy before the lockdown, there were questions about picking up the child and when they'd be able to do that because of travel restrictions and because of lockdowns with COVID, some children, and then it became what happens to the children now, especially in foreign countries where this was happening because inter-country travel was so limited that a lot of countries, such as like Belarus, just there were these children and the parent, no real parent associated with the child. And so that kind of became a little bit of a logistical nightmare. Obviously in the States, it's a little easier to travel state to state, but some people, maybe they have a lot of health problems, so they turn to surrogacy and they can't suddenly travel because of COVID. So that also became a big issue.
Thank you so much for all of that. A couple of other things that came up in the chat. Someone wanted to know, is there a time limit on how long a person needs to even be in that state, right? So for instance, if they were traveling and happened to be in New York and gave birth there, but was a California resident.
Yeah, so this is where it gets really tricky. From what I've seen, and like I said, it's hard sometimes to find a lot of information on this topic because it's so evolving and there's
limited access to information if you're not
limited
on the
access to
in.
information. And it's also, like I said, a lot of the conversation around it has kind of been led by gay men and kind of become like, oh, this is a queer issue. Like, this is for our community to take up, and kind of saying that you're going against the community to ask questions. And I'm not saying that we should never have surrogacy, that it's completely wrong. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that there should be questions raised around the commodification of this, just as I've seen a lot around people who were adopted as infants raising questions about private infant adoption. And so I just think it should be a more open process. And from my understanding, the person wouldn't be traveling much at that point because of the state-by-state laws. But if the emergency came up, I really don't know what would happen in terms of legality of baby. And it might turn into a legal suit because in certain states, it is actually illegal to put the parent's name on it if you do surrogacy on the birth certificate. It would be the surrogate's name on the birth certificate, and then you would have to go through the legal process of removing them and putting new parents on the birth certificate, and sort of you would actually kind of have to go through the adoption process, which is really how this all started. And the laws were simplified to make so you don't have to go through that legal process. But I don't know if you were traveling and what would happen.
Yeah. So then a thought that came up for some folks where this conversation is reminding me of discussion around sex work and having the autonomy to use one's own body in the way that they want and for a source of income. Unfortunately, it also sounds like the same case here, where the less policy and regulation around the form of work, the less guarantee of the protection of the person using their body for work, and the more dangerous, risky it can be, and higher risk of exploitation. Have you drawn these parallels as well?
Yes, and this is something why I think we need to be having this discussion on surrogacy and how the laws are so different depending on where you are, and the lack of information around these laws, because I totally agree with this person. A lot of the problem around sex work is the criminalization of it and the then shame hiding around it, the lack of legal remedies if something happens to you on the job because what you're doing is criminalized. And instead, in my opinion, there should be full legalization and then regulation so that people are protected when they're using their body to make money. So with these surrogacy laws being so different, there is a lot of exploitation. Like, once a rich couple from Germany is going to Greece to have someone have their baby for quote unquote altruistic reasons, not just straight up the money, there is a lot of room for exploitation. A lot of the people end up not getting the money that's promised to them, or they don't get all the money that's promised to them. And they don't have a lot of remedies because supposedly they're not doing it for the money. So because of these backdoors, some people are able to back out of paying for it. So like I said, some people might actually be doing it for altruistic reasons. I'm not denying that. But a lot of countries and states are hiding behind the idea of altruism, and then they're not as regulatory of this practice, and there just aren't the protections for the pregnant person. And that's who I'm really trying to advocate for, is the person carrying the child and person giving birth. And that at the end of the day, it's their body being used to have this child. And so they should be the number one person being protected, not the person using them to have the child. Though that is a touchy subject because they're paying for all of this. They're most likely using their sperm or egg or both for this. But when it's in your body, you have to have autonomy at the end of the day. You have to be the one who's able to have that control. And because of the different laws and the ever-changing nature of this, and you have to question, what are the motives here from the governments that are doing this, and who's being protected, who has the advantage. because the German people don't have to deal with the surrogacy laws, but they're benefiting from their neighbors' surrogacy laws. So where the power dynamics at play?
Thank you so much. That's it for questions right now. So we'll let you continue.
Yeah, and all those questions, it's so important, and it's, in my opinion, it's going to become a major issue because of the continued legalization and push for legalization. And it's a big issue in New York State to push for full legalization because of a lot of people in, say, New York City using other states' surrogacy laws. So I think it's going to become a much bigger issue and a much more prevalent issue. And I think our community, as people who advocate for bodily autonomy and advocate for pregnant people, and people don't want to be pregnant, that people to have a family as they choose. And as said in the beginning, being able to choose when and if you have a family and how that pregnancy is going and how that birthing is going. We need to have more protections in place. And, people are doing it for money. Okay, let's protect them. Like, let's make sure they get that money, let's keep that going. And so in addition, we really need to have more diversity and increased representation in terms of our providers, our messaging, our materials, the language that we're using in the literal sense of, Spanish, French, those types of languages, but also in the language around what type of couples have children and single people having children and who those are and who's represented in messaging, who's represented in materials, in the providers who are still predominantly white, cisgender, straight individuals who don't have the same lived experiences as others, and updating sort of messaging, updating their language, which also includes continuing education and updating in that sphere. So people I love SRJ and the work they do, and I've been following you guys for many years now, and kind of advocating for these sorts of things. And obviously we can't suddenly pay for a bunch of people to go to medical school. Obviously there's a lot of inherent hurdles within that, but there's also different advocates, doulas, midwives, and having other people in the room besides just the more traditional medical provider. Because as I said, there's obviously a lot of barriers that go into that type of field. So there needs to be more inclusion around people doulas and midwives who can serve as advocates. And as I said in the beginning, around sort of gender neutral language or specific language of what's going to be said around the person and their partner and what's making them feel best. It can be helpful to have someone with you who is advocating you through the whole process, because like I said, some people may have to stop taking hormones to do this type of thing, and so their body's going to be taking more than one type of change. So to have someone like a doula with them who not only is providing, say, traditional doula services, but also is able to say advocate if you're mid-labor for your pronouns, which may sound small if you're mid-labor, but to have on top of that, they're not using your correct name, your correct identity, it's just gonna pile on and make it worse. Or if you're going through an abortion and that's not being provided, and to just make the process better and easier for the patient and to make their experience better and easier, and to have more diversity would, to bring those different perspectives in, helps with that. It also, a big problem is a lot of abortion care is simply not taught in a lot of medical schools. especially if they are like a Christian or Catholic medical school. They simply will just not teach anything around this. So there's just like also just an inherent lack of knowledge around this subject. There's been horror stories of people in Texas being initially denied care for having a ectopic pregnancy. And obviously that has to be dealt with right away because it can kill the person. It's an immediate emergency. And there's been horror stories of doctors calling it an abortion and saying, well, in Texas, you can't get one after 6 weeks. And that's just not how that actually works. So beyond just like diversity and leadership and providers, it's also just the re-education around these types of things and forcing that education. Because even if you choose not to provide abortions, despite being an OB, which I don't understand really all of that, you still have to have knowledge around it so you can talk to your patients about them and refer them to someone else if you're unwilling to do it, or nurses being unwilling to participate in this. Well, what if you're the only one on shift? Does that person just not get an abortion? You know, like, I think there's a lot of questions around that. And just the need for education around it. Even if you're not personally going to do it, you still need to know these things. I've learned a lot in college that doesn't relate to my major, but I still had to know it to be like more rounded. And I hear you. She's starting up again, my cat. And so it relates the same way in terms of like knowing about different people's background. That also gets into the fact that disproportionately medical care is not properly given or given at all in terms of women of color when they're in birthing situations, and in terms of blood clotting risk or any increased risk, and they're just not taken seriously. Obviously, we've had some like recent famous examples of people like Serena Williams almost dying in childbirth and then being denied ability to wear certain articles of clothing to help with the after effects of that, even though she's the best tennis player ever, and she still was not properly advocated for and given care in birth. And imagine the average person who doesn't have millions of dollars in fame. So there's also need for language around that and increased just training around race in medical care, as well as doulas and midwives, because we can't just assume because someone's going into a certain field that they share all of our perspectives and are updated on all of the language. Even if they're like an abortion provider, I can't assume that they are like fully up to date on pronouns. You know, like they may be like an awesome advocate for me to get an abortion, but are they going to misgender me in the process? Like, you know, there's give and take with this stuff. And I think we all just need to do better and be better advocates. And I don't see anything wrong with someone calling me out if I just like, I'm not speaking correctly on things, or I don't know what's going on, because I want to keep learning. I want to be better. I don't want to just be stagnant and stuck in my beliefs. You know, things keep evolving and language keeps evolving, and we need to evolve with it. And before I get to see like if people have more questions, because I am a member of NOW, so I would be remiss if I didn't mention tomorrow's a big day for the Equal Rights Amendment, because tomorrow marks 2 years to the day since it reached its 35th state of ratification, which, if you didn't know, the constitutional amendment process is very confusing. So I will give my 2-minute pitch about the ERA. Basically, you have to get 3/5 of the state, so it's 35 states, you have to get ratified your amendment. The ERA had an artificial timeline associated to it, and outside of the timeline, they were able to get to 35 states. In the writing of the ERA, it says that it goes into effect 2 years after 35 states. Tomorrow marks it, to your point, it is not in effect because it has failed to be recognized for having reached the amount of states needed to ratify it. So there is going to be a protest in front of the White House tomorrow that I will be at with an organization that I work with who's speaking at it. And it will be live streamed online, and all of now's social media is promoting it. And I encourage people to look into that. The ERA is not a thing of the past. I was happy that you guys included it in the beginning. And we definitely need the Equal Rights Amendment because so many people are not in the Constitution. So they do not get constitutional protections. Like everything we're discussing today, obviously it's mostly gendered language that's used in laws. So like women instead of pregnant people. But women aren't in the Constitution. So like if we're advocating for ourselves and we're advocating for further protection of ourselves, every time we go to the courts, we don't have a constitutional backing for our protection. And several Supreme Court justices, that's how they see it. So when we're trying to advocate for ourselves and say like, we deserve autonomy, we deserve to control what happens in our lives, they can say, well, you're not in the Constitution, so I don't see any bearing of this. This is a state issue. It's not a constitutional issue. So we still need the ERA. We still need to be put in the Constitution so that we can have a reason for all of these laws to be supported and to go into effect, because we need to be in the Constitution. And now I would like to open it up to questions. This is a fun graphic I found online by this artist, Brianna Gomez, that I thought was good and kind of ties into the idea of things like the ERA and WIPA, the Women's Health Protection Act, and needing to put these things into law and making sure to advocate for our lawmakers this year. Obviously, every year is an election year, but this year, state offices, state assemblies, state Senate, and our representative in Congress are all up for election, and let's make sure we hold them accountable on these issues so that we are protected. And I'd like to open it up for questions. Anyone has any?
I just wanted to put down in the chat, someone shared, Medical Students for Choice is a great nationwide organization advocating for more abortion education and to end the stigma around abortion, in case anyone did not see that. But I had some questions about gender neutral language regarding programming. So I'm sure that there are some people here who are part of programs that work with pregnant people, that work with parenting folks, or that work with folks who are not even interested in going that way. Where do you think they can start in changing their materials, as in their pamphlets, their online spaces? Where do you think they should start, or where do you think they should go to get help to start changing their language to be gender neutral?
Yeah, so, and that's an interesting idea. I would say it's hard. There are some local queer spaces, but there's also some like rebuilding in local queer spaces. But there are different like national places that do this well. I will, and Sarah will appreciate why Planned Parenthood has really good language on their website and what they do. And a lot of their clinics, they're constantly moving to update to provide like the best treatment for everyone, including trans people. And also there's different networks like Human Rights Campaign, Transgender Law Center, and also, I mean, it's hard to say like expanding your network because that's very obviously easier said than done.
Yeah.
But it does come down to like, if there are queer people in your life, are you talking to them about these issues? Are you having discussions about their community and like where they fall within these issues? And it never hurts to ask someone. I think there can be a lot of thought that you're offending them by asking that you should know, that there's like this assumption that you should already know, that like you're behind and now it's too late to ask. It's not. like talking to every single client. Hi, so like as we're approaching this, if they do want to say they do want to be pregnant. So in this process, is there a specific way you want to be referred to? Is there any language that makes you uncomfortable in this process? And having that discussion, that's not offensive. It's really nice to have someone ask you those questions. And so I give you permission to ask people, what makes you comfortable? Like, is there something I should avoid? Which is good medical practice in general, but it does extend to pronouns as well, is having that conversation with people. Because even for someone who's like cis, who doesn't have there still could be stuff that they don't want to avoid. Maybe some people still have language that they don't want to use, even if they're not changing their pronouns, you know, like maybe they still go by she, her, but there are some words that they want to avoid, that they want to be gender neutral about, because maybe that's how they want to raise the child. Some people are going about it that way. So it doesn't hurt to ask the patient, how do you want to be referred? How do you want me referred to the baby? Like, how, is there anything I should be avoiding?
Yeah, I think one of the other things is really deeply not just changing language, but really changing culture.
Yes.
And so for folks in the room who may have never given birth, it is very likely that before someone even walks into a birthing room, before they even open up the screen or the curtain, they're like, how's mama doing?
Yeah.
I am someone who has given birth. In the 4 days I stayed in the hospital, I probably heard that over 100 times. And in each and every time, I thought about folks who, you haven't even seen me yet before you walk in the room. And I'm already possibly turned off, right? As well as, you know, I'm in a state of, who knows, giving birth or had already given birth, and having to advocate for yourself in that space can be really difficult.
Yes. And also, as that person who's coming in, you don't know the situation around their birth. Like, you don't know how wanted the birth was. You don't know if maybe they're giving the child, like they're planning adoption, but they're still like unsure of all the language around that. Or maybe they didn't want to start that while they were pregnant. There's a lot of like predatory practices around infant adoption, but like, you don't know the circumstance around someone's birth, even if it's not a pronoun issue, or maybe it was really, really difficult and you're not ready really dealing with that right away. Obviously there's a lot of like hormone and physical changes, and you really don't know what their situation is. Like, we really should stop making so many assumptions around people in terms of birth, and not keeping a pregnancy, which always like to add, every reason is valid around this. You don't have to justify anything to me in terms of birth, no birth. You don't have to justify it. It's your body. Do what you want. Do it with your body. I just think we should have the proper advocacy in place and the proper laws in place, and so that we can help you and we can advocate for you, and there's less assumptions being made about you.
Yeah, especially for us folks who are already doing the work, which is pretty much everybody in this room. Right? Like, most of the people who are in this room because they are already doing the work. And sometimes when we are doing the work, we are so excited to be there and to be doing it that we don't even realize folks we may be leaving out just by being who we are. And going along with whatever materials our grants have given us, right? Or whatever materials trickle down if we're part of bigger programs. And so maybe not necessarily using fighting as a word, but advocating as a program for this, maybe this national program or this state program that we work with to change language is really important, so that we can start to change culture.
Yes. And, you know, also like recognizing where you're coming from and like, what are your lived experiences? Obviously, I come from a place of a lot of privilege as a white person coming to this conversation. There is in the medical field, I'm going to be believed more than a Black person giving birth. And that's just a fact. It's not because of me. I'm not going in like hell raising, you know, like it doesn't matter. Same person, same. And so me doing additional work to educate myself on certain issues and realize where my bias is coming into play, and also like who I would be reaching out for, to like what groups I'd be reaching out to, what grants I'd be reaching out to, and like recognizing what's coming into play in terms of my lived experiences and anyone else doing this type of work, recognizing what their lived experiences are and how they're coming to, what their family history is around this issue, where that comes into a play with certain issues, and like where your knee jerk comes in because you're like, well, you know, like, well, my mom did this certain thing, so it can't be bad. And, you know, like, you know, I mean, whenever someone gives like the C-section statistics, me and my brother were both C-section babies. And so there's always like a little bit of a knee jerk, but then I'm like, well, those were like fully needed, like we weren't coming out type of C-sections. We still need to be advocating against like overuse of it, you know, like we have to recognize what's just our lived experiences, trying to protect the people around us in our immediate family versus what is a legitimate concern. You know, I could say something and think it's a legitimate concern, and another community is like, actually, that's not how you should be approaching it. But, you know, like I only know what I know. And I think we should all start coming at things with that perspective.
Yeah, and you know, being willing to expand on the knowledge from the things that we don't know. So we had someone put in the chat, took me a while to find it, but here's a link that demonstrates how to replace gendered medical terms with non-gendered terms. It's from Canadian Health Services Authority. Thank you, Juliana.
Yes. Definitely sharing knowledge with each other is also a huge part of this. We're all learning every day. Like this is not a stagnant area of discussion and conversation. And just because I'm non-binary doesn't mean I know everything on this. Like you can't have like one friend on an issue and then all of a sudden use them as like the expert on the topic, because they don't know everything. Just because you're part of a community doesn't mean you're the expert on the community or that you know everything in a community. You know, I'll be 25 later this year. So it's like, obviously I'm not an expert on stuff yet. I've never given birth. Like, I don't know everything.
You've got 25 years of lived experience, right? In discussing you know, something that kept coming up for me in the beginning of your presentation was how you were having a difficult time finding information. And I think about all of us who do this work and how we have resources and how we have one another to go to ask questions to. And I think about folks who don't really have a space, right? You said you put surrogacy into the Google chat and one or two things sort of really came up that were useful for you. And I think about folks who don't do this for a living, who don't have a friend in this field, who don't follow any of this on social media. And so after today, some of what we are going to do is also share some more information, as well as some of the information that was in the program for folks, in case you know of folks who are not a part of this world, so that they have that information, right? It's so important for that to be available. I did want to add in the chat, just in case for anybody that needed to know, if you are on social media and you are on Instagram, we follow a page called Trans Fertility, and they can connect you to a lot of other pages regarding information either about getting pregnant, legalities around that, so I will put that in the chat. We do have about 8 more minutes. So I just want to give people space if anybody wanted to unmute themselves at this time and maybe ask a question.
Yeah, and I think part of like when I said like searching up surrogacy is being able to weed through what's just like propaganda and what's information from both sides. Like what site is just advocating for one issue and is maybe being like, that's their whole budget is advocating for this issue versus who's just like actually giving out information. If you're not like in this world a little bit, it can be very hard to like distinguish between those things and like who to trust with this information. And yeah, like I've said, like it's only in the last year that I've really been like hammering down and really more so figuring out within my further in my identity. Like this is, so there's no, well, I don't know what point I was trying to make, but you know, like it's continual, and there's no shame in like asking questions around this stuff and trying to learn more, and you're not behind. Like you're not, it's not too late to get into this stuff and to ask questions around it.
Absolutely. There are, for folks who may not know, there are a lot of people within the community who are doulas and lactation specialists who are trans. There are more folks getting into that work in order for visibility, in order for representation. But folks can only do but so much. For those of us who are doing bigger programs, it is up to us to ensure that all of the language has changed in order for those folks to come to our programs, right? If I identify differently than what I do, right? If I identify as they, and I go to a program or I go to visit someone's social media and they're like, hey, mama, are you ready to have a baby? I'm already like, nope, right? For many of us, you know, it probably takes all of 10 to 20 seconds to make a decision on whether or not we will move further with something that is being introduced to us, specifically a program about birthing or not, right? And it is extremely important that we continue to sort of push the envelope so that more folks feel included. In our program, there are some services that are included, some community resources. Some of you have included some of your community resources, and we just wanted to say thank you. And if you need help navigating LGBTQ services, specifically harder on the T here in Monroe County, feel free to reach out to Roc.SRJ. We can navigate you on who you can reach out to in the community. And then they can probably take you a step further into the community if you need help with consultation or conversation or pointing your clients in specific spaces. Any lasting questions? Sarah, would you be able to put in the chat how folks can get in touch with you if they have questions, or if this is something that they would like for you to discuss with their other colleagues that may not be here today? Would you be able to do that?
Sure. What's the best way to get in touch with me? I'm on all social media. And I will spell out my name, but I'm on all social media with my name, and I will also give my email if someone would like to send me something that way. There we go.
I know we have some of your contact information in the program, but I just wanted to make sure this is the most updated in case anybody had any questions.
Yeah, I'm very online. So I'm very of my generation. I'm very online. I check stuff all the time. I am embarrassed enough to say that I have an Instagram for my cat. Like, you can find me. I'm out there.
You got it. You got it. Well, we want to say thank you so much for being here today. We really appreciate your lived experiences. We appreciate you sharing this with us, and giving us all of your knowledge so that we can be better at the work that we're doing.